The silence in Courtroom 304 was heavy enough to crush a man. On one side of the aisle sat the Sterling family, dressed in Italian silk, checking their Rolexes, already mentally spending the millions they were sure to inherit. On the other side sat Jane Vance, wearing a thrift store dress, hands folded quietly in her lap. They looked at her with pity, sometimes with disgust. They thought she was just the help. They thought she was there to receive a final paycheck. But when Judge Evelyn Blackwell lowered her gavel and read the final clause of Arthur Sterling's last will and testament, the smug smiles didn't just fade. They vanished. In 3 seconds, the quiet woman became the most powerful person in the room, and the relatives realized too late that their greed had just cost them everything. Here is the story of how silence and a little bit of justice destroyed a dynasty. Arthur J. Sterling was not a kind man in his youth, but he was a rich one. He had built a shipping empire from the docks of Seattle up to the high-rises of New York. When he passed away at the age of 89 inside his sprawling estate, Oakwood Manor, in the quiet hills of Litchfield County, Connecticut, the grief of his family was measurable. It was measured in seconds. Specifically, the 30 seconds it took for his daughter, Beatrice Sterling Davis, to stop pretending to cry and start asking where the safe deposit box keys were. For the last 5 years of Arthur's life, however, the family had been largely absent. Beatrice was busy vacationing in the French Riviera. Arthur's grandson, Julian, was building his brand in Los Angeles, which mostly involved crashing Ferraris he couldn't afford. The only person who had actually been at Oakwood Manor, changing Arthur's IV bags, reading him the morning paper, and tolerating his bouts of dementia-induced rage, was Jane Vance. Jane was Arthur's distant niece, a relation so removed on the family tree that Beatrice often referred to her as the Stray. When Jane's parents died in a car accident in Ohio 4 years prior, she had nowhere to go. Arthur, in a rare moment of pragmatism, offered her a room in the servants' wing in exchange for caregiving duties. He didn't want to pay a professional nurse agency the premium rates for 24/7 care. He got Jane for free. The day of the funeral was cold and grey. The cemetery in Litchfield was filled with black umbrellas and insincere handshakes. "She's still wearing those shoes," Julian whispered loudly to his mother, Beatrice, nodding toward Jane. Jane stood apart from the family, near the back, wearing a simple black dress and scuffed flats. "Doesn't she know this is a Sterling event? It's embarrassing." "Ignore her, Julian," Beatrice hissed, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. "Once the will is read on Monday, we'll give her a bus ticket back to Ohio and a few $100s. She'll be out of our hair." Jane heard them. She always heard them. She had spent 4 years becoming invisible, mastering the art of blending into the mahogany walls of the manor. She looked down at the fresh dirt covering Arthur's grave. She wasn't crying for the money. She was crying because, despite his gruff nature, Arthur had been the only family she had left, and in the late hours of the night, when the pain medication kicked in, he had told her stories. He had told her secrets. "Miss Vance?" Jane looked up. A tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses was standing beside her. It was Samuel Thorne, Arthur's personal attorney from the firm Thorne, Biggs and Stratton. He was known as the Shark of Connecticut for a reason. "Mr. Thorne," Jane said softly, "I'm sorry for your loss. I know you and Uncle Arthur were friends." "We were," Thorne said, his face unreadable. He glanced over at Beatrice and Julian, who were currently arguing with the funeral director about the cost of the flower arrangements. "The reading of the will is scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m. at the courthouse." "The courthouse?" Jane frowned. "I thought you usually did these things at the manor office." "Usually, yes," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave. But given the complexities of Mr. Sterling's final wishes, Judge Evelyn Blackwell has agreed to preside over the probate immediately. It is a formal hearing. You need to be there, Jane. Me? Jane clutched her purse. Mr. Thorne, Beatrice told me I'm not needed. She said I should pack my things. Thorne's eyes hardened behind his glasses. Do not pack anything, and do not let them bully you. Be at the courthouse, Monday, 9 to best a.m. He walked away before she could ask another question, leaving Jane standing in the drizzle, feeling a strange knot of dread and anticipation tightening in her stomach. The weekend following the funeral was a nightmare inside Oakwood Manor. With Arthur gone, Beatrice moved in with the subtlety of a hurricane. On Saturday morning, Jane was in the kitchen, preparing tea, when Beatrice stormed in, followed by Julian and Arthur's other nephew, Marcus. Marcus was a failed real estate developer who owed significant money to banks in Boston. He looked at the silverware in the manor with the hunger of a starving wolf. "Jane!" Beatrice barked, slamming her hand on the marble island. "Why are Arthur's paintings still on the wall?" I don't understand," Jane stammered. "We are having an appraiser come in this afternoon from Sotheby's," Beatrice said, checking her nails. "We are liquidating the art collection first. It's worth at least $12 million. I want them taken down and stacked in the library. Now." "But," Jane hesitated, "Mr. Thorne said nothing should be moved until the formal reading on Monday." The room went silent. Julian laughed, a cruel, barking sound. He walked over to Jane, towering over her. "Listen to me, you little mouse," Julian sneered. "Mr. Thorne works for us now. We are the heirs. This is our house. You are a guest who has overstayed her welcome. In fact," he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and slapped it onto the counter. "What is this?" Jane asked, her hands trembling. "It's a liability waiver," Marcus chimed in, pouring himself a glass of Arthur's expensive scotch, "and a non-disclosure agreement. You signed this, confirming you never stole anything from Arthur, and that you won't speak to the press about his medical condition. You sign it, and we give you a check for $5,000 right now." "And if I don't?" Jane asked quietly. Beatrice stepped forward, her perfume overpowering the smell of the tea. "Then we will have the security team escort you off the property for trespassing, and we will sue you for the theft of, I don't know. Let's say Grandma's pearl necklace. I'm sure we can find it missing if we look hard enough." It was a blatant threat. They were trying to scare her. They wanted her gone before the court date. They didn't want a witness to their looting. Jane looked at the paper. $5,000 was a lot of money for her. She could start over. She could leave this toxic pit of vipers. She picked up the pen. But then she remembered Arthur's voice from 2 weeks ago, late at night. "Jane, they are going to come at you. They are going to show their teeth. You have to be strong. Promise me, girl. Promise me you'll stand your ground." Jane put the pen down. "No," she whispered. "Excuse me?" Beatrice's eyes bugged out. "I said no," Jane said, her voice shaking but gaining volume. "I won't sign it. And I'm not leaving until Mr. Thorne tells me to. This was Arthur's home. He wouldn't want you tearing it apart before he's even cold in the ground." Beatrice turned a shade of purple that clashed with her designer scarf. "You ungrateful little leech. You think you have rights here? You're nothing. You wiped his chin and changed his sheets. That's it." "Get out of my kitchen," Jane said. She surprised herself. She surprised them even more. Julian stepped forward aggressively, but Marcus held him back. "Leave it, Julian. She wants to play the hard way. Fine. Monday morning she gets humiliated in front of a judge. Then we throw her out on the street with nothing." They stormed out, leaving Jane alone in the vast, silent kitchen. She sank to the floor and wept, terrified of what she had just done. She didn't know that in the study upstairs, hidden inside an old copy of Moby Dick, was a journal Arthur had kept for the last year. A journal that detailed every visit Beatrice didn't make, every dollar Marcus borrowed and never paid back, and every kindness Jane had shown him. She didn't know it yet, but Monday wasn't going to be a funeral for Arthur. It was going to be an execution for them. Monday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the Bridgeport Superior Court. The atmosphere inside Courtroom 304 was sterile and cold. The Sterling family arrived in a fleet of black SUVs. Beatrice wore a black Chanel suit that cost more than Jane's entire life earnings. Julian wore sunglasses indoors. Marcus looked nervous, constantly checking his phone for updates on his debts. They took up the entire front row of the right side, flanked by 2 junior lawyers they had hired just in case. Thorne tried anything tricky. Jane arrived by city bus. She was wet from the rain, her umbrella having turned inside out 2 blocks away. She walked into the courtroom, dripping slightly on the linoleum. "Over here, Miss Vance," Samuel Thorne signaled her to the table on the left. "Why is she sitting at the plaintiff's table?" Beatrice snapped loudly. "She's an employee. She should be in the gallery." "She is a named party in the proceedings," Thorne said calmly, arranging his files. "Named party?" Julian scoffed. "What, did Grandpa leave her the cat? Or maybe his old wheelchair?" The family snickered. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Evelyn Blackwell entered. Judge Blackwell was a legend in the state of Connecticut. She was 60 years old, sharp as a tack, and had zero tolerance for nonsense. She sat down, adjusted her robes, and looked over her spectacles at the Sterling family. "Be seated," she commanded. The room fell silent. "We are here for the probate hearing of the estate of Arthur J. Sterling," Judge Blackwell said. "Mr. Thorne, you are the executor?" "I am, Your Honor," Thorne said, standing up. "Very well, let's proceed. I have reviewed the preliminary documents. I understand there is a contest regarding the validity of the last will and testament." "Yes, Your Honor." Beatrice's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Henderson, stood up. "We represent the direct lineage of Arthur Sterling. We believe that any document produced by Mr. Thorne recently was created under undue influence. Our father was suffering from dementia. He was not in his right mind. We believe this young woman," he pointed an accusatory finger at Jane, "manipulated a sick, dying man to secure a payout." Jane shrank in her seat. The accusation stung like a slap. "Manipulated?" Thorne's voice cut through the room. "Your Honor, Mr. Sterling was of sound mind until the very end. In fact, he recorded a video deposition 3 weeks before his death, specifically to address this accusation." "A video?" Beatrice whispered, her face paling. "Play it," Judge Blackwell ordered. Thorne nodded to the court clerk. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. The face of Arthur Sterling appeared. He looked frail, sitting in his leather armchair at the manor, but his eyes were clear and blue. "My name is Arthur Joseph Sterling," the video recording played. "Today is October 14th. I am making this statement of my own free will. I know my family. I know that when I die, Beatrice will want the jewelry, Julian will want the cars, and Marcus will want the cash to pay off his gambling debts." In the courtroom, Marcus audibly gasped. Julian looked like he had been punched. "They haven't visited me in 6 months," Arthur continued on screen. "Not once, not for my birthday, not when I fell and broke my hip. They only called to ask when the dividends from the company stock were coming." Arthur paused to cough, and in the video, Jane's hand came into the frame, offering him a glass of water. He took it with a smile. "Thank you, my dear. Arthur said to the Jane in the video. He looked back at the camera. This young woman, Jane, is the only reason I am still alive today. She cooked for me. She read to me. She cleaned up after me when I was too ashamed to ask for help. She never asked for a raise. She never asked to be in the will. Arthur leaned into the camera lens. So to my family, who is watching this right now, I want you to know that I saw you. I saw exactly who you are, and I have adjusted my will accordingly. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Beatrice was gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Blackwell said, "please read the distribution of assets." Thorne picked up a thick document bound in blue paper. "To my daughter Beatrice," Thorne read, "I leave the family photo albums found in the attic so that she may remember the family she neglected." "What?" Beatrice screeched. "That's it. The albums." "To my nephew, Marcus," Thorne continued, ignoring the outburst, "I leave the forgiveness of his current debt to me, totaling $450,000. You are now debt-free to the estate, Marcus. Don't waste it." Marcus slumped in his chair. It was a lot of money, but it wasn't the millions he needed. "To my grandson, Julian," Thorne read, "I leave my 1998 Ford pickup truck. It is reliable, sturdy, and requires hard work to maintain. Traits you currently lack, but hopefully will learn." "The truck?" Julian shouted, standing up. "He has a collection of Ferraris. He has a vintage Shelby. I get a rusted Ford?" "Sit down!" Judge Blackwell slammed the gavel. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." Julian sat down, fuming. "And finally," Thorne said, turning the page. He looked at Jane, and for the first time he smiled genuinely. "To Jane Vance." Thorne paused. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out. "To Jane Vance, who gave me dignity when I had none, I leave the remainder of the Sterling estate." Beatrice let out a strangled sound. "This includes," Thorne listed, "the Oakwood Manor property, the vacation villa in Lake Como, the entire art collection, the controlling stake in Sterling Shipping Logistics, and the contents of all private bank accounts, totaling approximately $84 million. "No!" Beatrice screamed, jumping to her feet. "This is a lie. This is fraud. She's a witch. She poisoned him." "Order!" Judge Blackwell yelled. "I want a recess," Beatrice's lawyer shouted. "We contest this. This woman is a nobody. She's a waitress. She can't run a shipping empire." "Actually," Thorne interrupted, his voice calm, "there is one condition attached to the inheritance, a clause that Mr. Sterling was very specific about." Jane looked up, tears streaming down her face. She didn't care about the money. She was just overwhelmed by Arthur's defense of her. "What condition?" she whispered. Thorne looked at the Sterling family, then back to Jane. "The character clause," Thorne said. "Mr. Sterling stipulated that for the will to be valid, Jane Vance must agree to one thing. She has the power to veto the inheritances of the other family members. If she decides they are undeserving, she can strip them of the photo albums, the debt forgiveness, and the truck. She can leave them with absolutely zero. It is entirely up to her discretion." Every head in the courtroom turned to Jane, the quiet woman, the mouse. Beatrice, Marcus, and Julian looked at her. Their arrogance was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated fear. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that the room seemed to spin. Jane stood up slowly. She wiped her eyes. She looked at Beatrice, who had mocked her shoes. She looked at Julian, who had threatened to throw her out. She looked at Marcus, who had tried to buy her off. She walked toward the center of the courtroom. "Can I speak?" Jane asked the judge. "You may," Judge Blackwell said softly. Jane turned to her relatives. Beatrice's lip was trembling. "Jane, darling," Beatrice stammered, her voice shaking. We were just upset. You know how family is. We love you. We're family." "Family," Jane repeated the word, tasting it. "Family," Jane repeated, her voice quiet but carrying to the back of the silent courtroom. Beatrice nodded eagerly, tears streaming down her face, smearing her expensive mascara. "Yes, Jane, we are the only kin you have left." Jane looked at Beatrice for a long moment. "When my parents died," Jane said, "I called you, Aunt Beatrice. I was 22 and terrifyingly alone. I asked if I could stay in your guest house for a month until I got on my feet. Do you remember what you told me?" Beatrice froze. "You told me your insurance policy didn't cover strays and hung up the phone," Jane recalled without bitterness, just cold fact. "Arthur took me in. Not you." She turned to Marcus. "And you. 6 months ago, Arthur was crying because he couldn't remember his mother's face. I called you to ask if you had any old photos. You said, 'Time is money, sweetie, and I'm short on both.' Then you asked if Arthur had signed the check for your bridge loan yet." Marcus looked down at his expensive Italian loafers. Jane turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I understand the power Arthur has given me. I don't want their pity albums or their debts or that old truck. But Arthur wanted them to learn something. I won't exercise the clause today. I want to see if they are capable of being decent human beings first. Let the will stand as read for now." Judge Blackwell nodded slowly, a hint of respect in her eyes. "Very well. The will is admitted to probate. Mr. Thorne, you may begin the transfer of assets. Court is adjourned. The family has 30 days to file formal objections before the estate is finalized." She banged the gavel. It sounded like a cannon shot, signaling the start of a war. The moment the judge left the bench, Beatrice's sobbing ceased instantly. Her face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "You think this is over?" Beatrice hissed, leaning over the railing toward Jane and Thorne. "You think you can steal my father's legacy, you little gold-digging rat? We'll tie this up in court for a decade. You'll never see a dime." "Mrs. Sterling Davis," Samuel Thorne interposed himself between them, his voice icy. "I suggest you save your energy for your own legal counsel. You are now trespassing on my client's time." Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped, but the media had arrived. Cameras flashed as the Sterling family emerged, looking grim. Beatrice shoved past a reporter, asking about the character clause. Jane emerged minutes later, flanked by Thorne. The flashes blinded her. "Ms. Vance, how does it feel to be the heiress of Sterling Shipping? Is it true the family treated you like a servant? Are you going to evict them?" "No comment," Thorne said repeatedly, guiding Jane into a waiting town car, Arthur's car. As they pulled away, Jane looked out the rain-streaked window and saw Beatrice, Julian, and Marcus huddled under an awning, arguing violently with their lawyer, Mr. Henderson. They looked like cornered animals. An hour later, in the plush conference room of Henderson's law firm, the mood was venomous. "How could you let that video happen?" Julian shouted at Henderson, pacing the room. "You said the old man was too far gone to form a coherent sentence." "Thorne blindsided us," Henderson said, loosening his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. "He hid the deposition perfectly, but listen to me. We aren't finished. The character clause is highly unusual. We can attack it as being against public policy, arguing it gives too much arbitrary power to an interested party. We can file an injunction to freeze the assets." "That takes too long," Beatrice snapped. She poured herself a midday vodka from the office bar. "We need something faster. We need to destroy her credibility. If we can prove she cheated Arthur or lied to him, We can invalidate the whole will based on fraud. She's a choir girl from Ohio, Mother. Marcus slumped in a chair. She doesn't have skeletons. She barely has a personality. Everyone has skeletons, Beatrice snarled. She slammed her glass down. I want to know everything about Jane Vance before she came to Oakwood Manor. Who were her friends? Who did she owe money to? Who was she sleeping with? People like her don't just appear out of nowhere. Beatrice turned to Henderson. Hire Caelan Reed. Henderson hesitated. Reed? Beatrice, that man is a pit bull. He doesn't play by the rules. If Thorne finds out we hired him... I don't care about rules, Beatrice screamed. We are talking about $84 million. Send Reed to Ohio. Tell him I want dirt. I want filth. I want something that makes her look like the whore she is. So when we go back to court, Judge Blackwell vomits when she looks at her. Returning to Oakwood Manor was surreal. The grand iron gates, which Jane had only ever opened for others, now swung open for her. The staff was lined up in the foyer. Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper, a stern woman who had secretly slipped Jane extra blankets in the winter, stepped forward. Welcome home, Miss Vance, Mrs. Higgins said, offering a small, genuine curtsy. Please, Mrs. Higgins, Jane said, feeling uncomfortable. It's just Jane. Not any more, ma'am, Mrs. Higgins said firmly. Not any more. The East Wing Master Suite has been prepared for you. We moved your things from the previous room. Jane walked through the silent house. It felt different now. The portraits of sterling ancestors on the walls seemed to glare at her, interlopers in their domain. She entered Arthur's study. It still smelled of his tobacco and old leather books. Samuel Thorne was waiting for her there, 2 stacks of thick binders on the massive oak desk. This is the reality, Jane, Thorne said soberly, patting the first stack. This is Sterling Shipping Logistics. It's a global operation with 4,000 employees, fleets in the Atlantic and Pacific, and very aggressive competitors. The board of directors is currently in emergency session. They are terrified. They think you're going to sell it off for parts. Jane ran a hand along the desk. I don't know the first thing about shipping, Samuel. Arthur knew that. He left a letter of instruction. He wants you to appoint an interim CEO. He recommends the current COO, Sarah Jenkins, a very capable woman Arthur trusted. Your job, for now, is to learn. To be the majority shareholder. To hold the reins. Thorne moved to the second stack of binders. And this is the legal battle. Henderson filed an emergency injunction an hour ago to freeze the bank accounts. We will defeat it tomorrow morning, but it's just the first salvo. Beatrice is going to try to prove you are unfit, mentally unstable, or criminally manipulative. Let them try, Jane said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Standing in Arthur's room, she felt his strength rubbing off on her. I have nothing to hide. Thorne looked at her over his glasses. Are you sure, Jane? Because if there is anything at all in your past that they can twist, you need to tell me now, before they find it. Jane thought back to her life in Dayton, Ohio, before the crash that killed her parents. It was a quiet life, community college, working at a diner. Then she remembered Darius. A chill ran down her spine. There was a boy, back in Dayton, years ago. Thorne sat down, pen poised. Tell me. While Jane was confessing her past to Thorne, Caelan Reed was renting a cheap motel room in Dayton, Ohio. Reed was a man who looked like he slept in his trench coat. He smelled of cheap cigarettes and desperation. He charged $500 an hour because he got results, usually by stepping over legal lines. He spent 2 days interviewing Jane's old neighbors, landlords, and bosses at the diner. They all said the same thing. Sweet girl, quiet, tragic about her parents. It was a dead end. Frustrated, Reed went to a dive bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where police sirens were background noise. He paid the bartender $50 for information about anyone who knew Jane Vance 5 years ago. A man at the end of the bar perked up. He was gaunt, with tattoos creeping up his neck and eyes that looked too old for his face. "Vance?" the man said, his voice raspy. "Yeah, I knew her. She was my girl." Reed walked over, placing a $100 bill on the bar counter. "What's your name, friend?" "Darius Hayes," the man said, snatching the bill. "You were dating Jane Vance?" "She doesn't seem your type, Darius," Reed said dryly. Darius laughed, a hacking sound. "She wasn't always Little Miss Perfect. Before her folks died, she was wild. We ran together. She was driving the getaway car the night I got busted for the pharmacy job." Reed's heart rate sped up. This was gold. "Getaway car? She was never charged." "Daddy paid off the cops," Darius spat. "Then they died, and she bolted to Connecticut to play nursemaid to some rich uncle. Left me to rot in state prison for 4 years. I just got out." Reed pulled out an envelope. It contained $5,000 in cash, Beatrice's money. "Darius," Reed smiled a predatory smile. "How would you like to take an all-expenses-paid trip to Connecticut? There are some people there who would love to hear your story about Jane Vance, the getaway driver." Darius looked at the money, his eyes gleaming with vengeance and greed. "When do we leave?" Back at Oakwood Manor, 3 days later, the peace was shattered. Jane was in the library, trying to understand a quarterly earnings report for the shipping company when Mrs. Higgins entered, looking pale. "Miss Vance, there is a gentleman at the gate. He insists on seeing you. He refused to give his name to security, but he sent this in." Mrs. Higgins handed Jane a small, tarnished silver locket. Jane's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she took it. It was inexpensive, something she had bought at a fair when she was 19. Inside was a tiny, faded photo of her and Darius, laughing. She hadn't seen it in 5 years. She thought she had lost it the night Darius was arrested, the night she fled the scene in a panic, forever changing the course of her life. "Let him in," Jane whispered, closing her fist around the locket so tightly it cut into her palm. "But, Mum, security says he looks rough. Let him in, Mrs. Higgins. Bring him here." 10 minutes later, the library doors opened. Darius sauntered in, looking out of place among the first editions and leather furniture. He looked healthier than he had in Ohio, thanks to Beatrice's funding. He was wearing a new suit that didn't quite fit, bought by Kaylin Reed. "Hello, Ellie," Darius grinned, enjoying the look of terror on her face. "Nice place you got here. A little upgrade from the trailer park, huh?" "What do you want, Darius?" Jane asked, standing up, trying to keep the desk between them. "I heard you came into some money. Serious money." Darius walked around the room, touching a priceless Ming vase. "I got to thinking about old times, about how you bailed on me when the cops showed up. You owe me, Ellie. You owe me 4 years of my life." "I didn't know you were robbing the place," Jane pleaded. "You told me you were just picking up a prescription." "Doesn't matter what you knew. Matters what it looked like." Darius leaned over the desk, his breath foul. "And right now, it looks like the heiress to the sterling fortune is an accessory to armed robbery." The door opened again. Beatrice stood there, flanked by Julian and the private investigator, Kaylin Reed. Beatrice looked triumphant. "Well, well," Beatrice purred, stepping into the room. "It seems the quiet mouse has a very loud past. Accessory to robbery? My goodness, Jane. Arthur would be devastated to know he left his company to a common criminal." Jane looked from Darius to Beatrice. It was an ambush. "Here is the deal, darling," Beatrice said, placing a document on the desk. "You sign over full control of the estate to me and Julian right now. We will give you a generous stipend, say 10,000 a year, to live quietly somewhere far away. And Mr. Hayes here," she gestured to Darius, "will forget he ever saw you." "And if I don't?" Jane asked, her voice barely audible. "Then tomorrow morning, Mr. Hayes goes to the district attorney." Beatrice smiled cruelly. "And instead of living in a manor, you'll be living in a cell. The choice is yours. Family." The silence in the library of Oakwood Manor was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a gunshot. Jane looked down at the document Beatrice had slid across the mahogany desk. It was a quitclaim deed and a voluntary renunciation of executorship. If she signed it, she would be safe. She could go back to being a nobody, living in a small apartment, away from the sharks in Italian suits and the ghosts of her past. Darius was grinning at her, a predator smelling blood. Beatrice was checking her watch, as if destroying a life was just another appointment in her day planner. "Tick-tock, darling," Beatrice said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the desk. "My offer expires in 5 minutes. After that, I call the police commissioner. We play bridge on Tuesdays." Jane looked at the pen. Her hand hovered over it. She thought of Arthur. She thought of the late nights he had spent telling her about how he built his empire. Not by taking the easy road, but by standing firm when everyone else ran. "Integrity, Jane," he had told her once, his voice raspy from age. "It's the only thing they can't tax and the only thing they can't steal. You have to give it away. Don't ever give it away." Jane withdrew her hand. She stood up straight, her spine stiffening. The fear was still there, cold and sharp in her stomach, but something else was rising to meet it. Anger. "No," Jane said. Beatrice blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said no," Jane repeated, louder this time. She looked directly at Darius. "I was 19. I was stupid. I was in love with a bad man. But I didn't know you were going to rob that pharmacy until you came running out with a gun. I didn't take a dime of that money. I drove away because I was a terrified kid." She turned to Beatrice. "You want to destroy me? Go ahead. Tell the world. Drag my name through the mud. But I am not signing this. Arthur chose me. And I am not going to let you steal what he built just because you found a skeleton in my closet." Beatrice's face contorted into a mask of pure venom. "You foolish girl. You think the truth matters? This is the court of public opinion. By tomorrow morning, you won't be the grieving niece. You'll be the gangster heiress. The board will vote you out. The judge will revoke your status." "Then do it," Jane said, pointing to the door. "Get out of my house." "It's our house," Julian shouted, stepping forward, his fists clenched. "Not yet," Jane said calmly. "Security." 2 burly security guards who had been waiting in the hallway stepped in. They looked at Jane, then at the Sterlings. They didn't move for a second. The tension was palpable. Who signed their checks? "Escort Mrs. Sterling Davis and her guests off the property," Jane commanded, her voice echoing Arthur's authority. "Now!" The guards moved. "Let's go, folks," one of them said, placing a hand on Julian's shoulder. "Don't touch me." Julian swatted the hand away. Beatrice gathered her purse, her eyes burning holes into Jane. "You just signed your own death warrant, Jane. Come on, Darius. We have a police station to visit." They stormed out. The heavy library doors slammed shut, leaving Jane alone. Her knees finally gave way, and she collapsed into Arthur's leather chair, burying her face in her hands. She sobbed, deep, racking heaves. She had stood her ground. But at what cost? The fallout was instantaneous and nuclear. By 6:00 a.m. the next morning, the news vans were lined up outside the gates of Oakwood Manor. The headlines were brutal. The Bridgeport Chronicle. From getaway driver to billionaire, the secret criminal past of the sterling heiress. Channel 8 News. Police investigate Jane Vance for role in 2019 armed robbery. Jane couldn't turn on the TV without seeing her high school graduation photo next to a mugshot of Darius. Beatrice had given an exclusive interview, weeping on camera about how she feared for her father's safety in his final days, implying Jane might have harmed him, though she had zero proof. Samuel Thorne arrived at 8 a.m., fighting his way through the press pack. He looked grave. "It's bad, Jane," Thorne said, throwing a stack of newspapers on the kitchen table. The stock price of sterling shipping dropped 12% this morning. The board of directors is calling for an emergency vote of no confidence. They want to invoke the morality clause in the corporate bylaws to strip you of voting power. "Can they do that?" Jane asked, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "If you are charged with a felony." "Yes," Thorne said. "And Detective Callahan from the Dayton PD is on his way here. They are reopening the cold case based on Darius's new testimony." "He's lying," Jane said. "He's saying I planned it with him. I didn't." "It's his word against yours," Thorne said, pacing the kitchen. "And right now, he's the victim who served time, and you're the rich girl who got away. Juries hate that dynamic." Thorne stopped pacing and looked at her. "Jane, we need a miracle, or we need dirt. Beatrice paid for Darius to come here. We know that. But we need to prove it." "Did they say anything? Anything specific?" "They just threatened me," Jane said. "Beatrice offered me $10,000 a year if I signed." "Extortion," Thorne muttered, but without proof. Jane suddenly sat up straight. "Wait. The library. What about it?" "Arthur," Jane said, a memory triggering. "About 6 months ago, Arthur became paranoid that the staff was stealing his scotch. He had a camera installed, hidden in the eye of the bust of Caesar on the bookshelf." Thorne's eyes went wide. "Was it on?" "I don't know," Jane said, scrambling up. "He used to check it on his iPad. I never touched it." They ran to the study. Thorne found Arthur's old iPad in the desk drawer. The battery was dead. Thorne fumbled for a charger, his hands shaking slightly. He plugged it in. They waited for the Apple logo to appear. It felt like an eternity. The screen lit up. Thorne guessed the passcode, Arthur's birthday. He navigated to the home security app. "Library cam," Thorne whispered, tapping the icon. He scrolled back to the previous afternoon. There it was, high-definition video. No audio. But the picture was crystal clear. You could see Darius leaning over the desk. You could see Beatrice slam the document down. You could see the aggression in Julian's body language. "It's video only," Thorne sighed, deflating. "It shows a heated argument, but without audio. They can claim they were just negotiating a settlement. It doesn't prove extortion. It doesn't prove they paid Darius to lie." Jane slumped. "So it's useless?" "Not useless." Thorne narrowed his eyes. "But not a smoking gun. We need something that links Beatrice's bank account to Darius's pocket. And we need it before the emergency hearing tomorrow." Thorne pulled out his phone. "I'm calling an associate of mine. His name is Miller. He used to be FBI cybercrimes. If Beatrice moved money to a convicted felon, she left a trail. Go get dressed, Jane. We have a war to fight." The emergency probate hearing was set for Wednesday. The courtroom was packed. It seemed the entire town of Litchfield had turned out to watch the gangster heiress get taken down. Beatrice sat in the front row, looking like the grieving, concerned daughter. She wore a modest navy suit and a cross necklace. Beside her sat Darius Hayes, looking uncomfortable in a tie, flanked by Mr. Henderson. Judge Blackwell looked furious. She hated media circuses in her courtroom. "This court is in session," Blackwell snapped. "Mr. Henderson, you filed an emergency motion to remove Miss Vance as executor and freeze the assets." "Yes, Your Honor." Henderson stood, oozing confidence. "New evidence has come to light regarding Miss Vance's character. She is currently the subject of an active police investigation regarding a felony armed robbery. We believe she is a flight risk and completely unfit to manage the Sterling estate. We have a witness, Mr. Darius Hayes, prepared to testify to her criminal history." "A criminal history she concealed from this court," Beatrice shouted from her seat. "Sit down, Mrs. Sterling Davis," Judge Blackwell warned. She turned to Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, your client's reputation is taking a beating. What say you?" Thorne stood up. He looked calm. Too calm. He walked to the center of the room, carrying a simple manila folder. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice baritone and smooth. "The defense agrees that character is the central issue here. However, we believe the character clause Arthur Sterling wrote into his will is the only relevant legal standard." "The clause is irrelevant if she is in prison," Henderson argued. "Is she in prison?" Thorne asked. "Last I checked, an investigation is not a conviction. But let's talk about Mr. Hayes." Thorne turned to Darius. "Mr. Hayes, you claim Ms. Vance planned the robbery with you?" "Yeah," Darius grunted. "She drew the map." "I see," Thorne said. "And you came forward now, 4 years later, purely out of a sense of civic duty? To ensure justice was served?" "That's right," Darius sneered. "It had nothing to do with the $50,000 wired to your checking account at Dayton Mutual Bank 3 days ago." The room went deadly silent. Beatrice froze. Henderson dropped his pen. "Objection!" Henderson screamed. "A speculation." "I have the bank records right here," Thorne said, pulling a sheet from the folder. "Courtesy of a subpoena executed this morning. A wire transfer from Sterling Davis Personal Holdings to Darius Hayes. Date, November 18th. Amount, $50,000. Thorne walked over to Beatrice, dropping the paper on the table in front of her. "Now," Thorne turned back to the judge. "Why would a wealthy socialite send $50,000 to a convicted felon she has never met? Unless, of course, she was buying his testimony." "That's a lie!" Beatrice shrieked, standing up. It was charity. He's a troubled youth. I was helping him get back on his feet." "Charity?" Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Because we also have the security footage from the library of Oakwood Manor," Thorne signaled the clerk. "The video from the bust of Caesar played on the big screen. It showed Beatrice slamming the papers down. It showed Darius intimidating Jane." "While this video lacks audio," Thorne narrated, "combined with the bank transfer, it paints a very clear picture. This wasn't charity, Your Honor. This was witness tampering. This was extortion. This was a conspiracy to defraud the court." Judge Blackwell's face turned a terrifying shade of red. She looked at Henderson. "Counselor, did you know about this payment?" I had no idea, Your Honor," Henderson stammered, stepping away from Beatrice as if she were radioactive. "I recuse myself. I cannot represent this client." "You can't leave me!" Beatrice grabbed his arm. "I paid you a retainer." "Mr. Hayes," Judge Blackwell looked at Darius. "I suggest you start talking. If you lie to me now, I will add perjury to your parole violation, and you will go back to prison for a very, very long time. Did Mrs. Sterling Davis pay you to lie about Miss Vance?" Darius looked at the judge, then at the terrified Beatrice, and finally at the stone-faced security guards blocking the exit. He realized the game was up. He wasn't going to jail for a rich lady who looked at him like he was trash. "Yeah," Darius said, his voice cracking. She found me in Ohio. Said if I came here and said Ellie was the mastermind, she'd give me 50 grand now, and another 50 when the will was overturned. Ellie didn't know nothing about the robbery. She was just waiting in the car. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. Beatrice collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically. Julian tried to sneak out the back door, but was blocked by a bailiff. Jane sat perfectly still at the plaintiff's table. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Thorne. "It's over, Jane," he whispered. But Jane shook her head. She stood up slowly. "No," Jane said, her voice steady. "It's not over, not yet." She picked up the microphone on the table. The feedback squeal silenced the room. "Your Honor," Jane said. "The will. The character clause." Judge Blackwell banged her gavel to silence the crowd. "Miss Vance?" "Arthur's will stated that I have the discretion to strip the family of their inheritance if they proved undeserving," Jane said, turning to face her aunt and cousins. "I hesitated before because I wanted to believe they were still family. I wanted to believe there was some good in them." She looked at Beatrice, who was now looking up at her with mascara-streaked eyes, pleading silently. "But you didn't just try to take the money," Jane said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You tried to take my freedom. You tried to send me to prison for a crime I didn't commit. You tried to erase my life." Jane took a deep breath. "I am invoking the clause, effective immediately." "No!" Julian shouted. "You can't! That's millions!" "Beatrice Sterling Davis," Jane announced. "I strip you of the photo albums. You don't deserve the memories of a man you despised." "Marcus Sterling," Jane continued, finding him in the crowd. "The debt forgiveness is revoked. You owe the estate $450,000, payable immediately. If you cannot pay, the estate will seize your assets." Marcus put his head in his hands. "And Julian," Jane looked at the boy who had mocked her shoes. "The truck stays with me. You can walk." But what about us?" Beatrice cried. "We're ruined. We have nothing." "You have what you started with," Jane said coldly. "Yourselves. And I think you'll find that's a very lonely company." She turned to the judge. "And Your Honor, I would like to press charges against Beatrice Sterling Davis and Julian Sterling for extortion and attempted fraud." "Granted," Judge Blackwell said with a nod of grim satisfaction. "Bailiff, take them into custody." As the handcuffs clicked around Beatrice's wrists, the same wrists that had worn diamond bracelets only minutes ago, the courtroom broke into chaos. But Jane didn't watch. She turned to Samuel Thorne. "Take me home, Samuel," she said. "I have a company to run." 6 months later, the snow had melted from the grounds of Oakwood Manor, replaced by the vibrant greens of spring. The estate, once a tomb of silence and dust under Beatrice's neglect, was now alive. Gardeners were tending to the roses, Arthur's favourites, and the windows were thrown open to let the fresh air in. Inside the study, Jane Vance sat behind the massive oak desk. She wasn't wearing the thrift store dress anymore. She wore a tailored cream blazer, her hair pulled back in a sharp, professional bun. She didn't look like a mouse or a stray. She looked like a Sterling. Across from her sat Sarah Jenkins, the COO of Sterling Shipping. "The quarterly numbers are up 15%, Jane," Sarah said, tapping her tablet. "The decision to expand the fleet into the renewable energy sector was a risk, but it's paying off. The board is impressed. They've stopped asking about your age and started asking for your advice." Jane smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "That's good to hear, Sarah. Arthur always said shipping was about seeing where the tide was going before anyone else." The door opened, and Samuel Thorne walked in. He looked less like a shark these days and more like a proud uncle. "Meeting adjourned?" Thorne asked as Sarah gathered her files. "Just finished," Jane said. "Walk me out, Samuel." They strolled through the hallway, passing the spots where the family portraits used to hang. Jane had taken down the paintings of the ancestors who had built the empire on greed. In their place, she had hung photos of the workers, the sailors, the dock hands, the administrative staff, who actually kept the company running. "I have an update on the former heirs," Thorne said quietly as they stepped onto the porch. Jane paused. "Tell me." "Beatrice took a plea deal," Thorne said. 2 years in minimum security for witness tampering and attempted extortion. She's currently working in the prison laundry. I hear she's not very popular with the other inmates." Jane looked out at the driveway. "And the boys?" "Marcus declared bankruptcy last week. The estate seized his condo and his car to pay back the debt. He's currently living in a studio apartment in Queens, working telemarketing." Thorne chuckled dryly. "And Julian, well, that's the most poetic part. He's working as a valet at a hotel in Los Angeles. He spends his days parking Ferraris he can't drive." Jane nodded slowly. There was no joy in her eyes, only a sense of balance restored. "I don't hate them, Samuel. I don't think about them anymore." "That is the ultimate victory," Thorne noted. "Indifference." They walked down the stone path toward the garage. Parked there, gleaming in the sunlight, was Arthur's 1998 Ford pickup truck. It was polished, the engine rebuilt, the rust gone. It looked better than any sports car. "Where are you off to?" Thorne asked. "The airport," Jane said, opening the driver's side door. "I'm flying to Ohio. I bought the old diner I used to work at. We're turning it into a community kitchen for people who need a meal. I'm naming it Arthur's Place." Thorne smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He would have loved that. "You know, Jane, when he wrote that will, he told me he wasn't looking for someone who knew how to be rich. He was looking for someone who knew what it felt like to be poor. He knew you were the only one who wouldn't let the money change who you are." Jane climbed into the truck. She gripped the steering wheel, the same wheel Arthur had held for 20 years. "He was wrong about one thing, though," Jane said, starting the engine. It purred with a low, steady rumble. "Oh?" "The money did change me," Jane said, looking at the manor that was now a home, not a fortress. "It gave me a voice, and I'm never going to be quiet again." She shifted the truck into gear and drove down the long driveway, past the iron gates, and out into a world that finally knew her name. The quiet woman had spoken, and the echo would last for generations. And that is the story of Jane Vance. She proved that dignity is worth more than diamonds, and that silence isn't always a sign of weakness. Sometimes it's just the calm before the storm. The Sterling family learned the hard way that when you treat people like they are invisible, you never see the hit coming. Arthur Sterling's legacy wasn't his money. It was his judge of character. He knew that the girl who cleaned his floors was the only one fit to sit on his throne. What do you think? Did Jane do the right thing by taking everything? Or should she have shown mercy to her family despite their cruelty? If you were in her shoes, would you have signed the papers or fought back? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.